Hello, my name is Kevin Harrison. I'm the project manager for the Columbia Road Northwest Bus Priority Project. This presentation will provide an update on the concept planning phase of this project. In this presentation, we will revisit the goals of the project and provide a brief summary of the needs assessment. For more information on the needs assessment, please review the other presentation on the project website. We'll talk about DDOT's process for concept development, some of the trade-offs that are necessary in order to achieve the project goals, and also concepts that DDOT evaluated for the corridor, including a concept that DDOT prefers at this point based on technical considerations. But we want to hear from you before making any decisions, and I will share with you what are the best ways to do that later in the presentation. I am on the bus priority team at DDOT, and reducing travel time for buses in this corridor is a key goal. However, safety is a goal for every one of our projects, and this one is no different. All of the concepts that I describe in the presentation will go through a design process that ensures safety is engineered into the roadway design. The district is committed to eliminating transportation-related serious injuries and deaths among all users of the street. This project will include safety features and roadway design changes that will improve safety for all roadway users in line with the district's Vision Zero goal. This section of the presentation will provide a brief summary of the needs assessment that was performed in the first phase of the project. This phase was necessary in order to define the problems that we are trying to solve for. I want to sincerely thank everyone who commented during the needs assessment because the information you provide by spending every day on Columbia Road is irreplaceable. We received over 100 comments through the project website, emails, and in-person conversations with people on Columbia Road. The most frequent comment that we received indicated that the corridor is unsafe for biking. Most commonly, people attributed that to parking violations, inadequate infrastructure, and reckless driving. People frequently requested protected bike lanes in the corridor and improved crosswalks. Many people's comments included detailed recommendations and narratives. I read every one of these comments and appreciate the time people took to share their stories. This information will help inform the design as we move forward and make the project better. Some examples of what people said in their comments were, I'm sick of having to fear for my own and my loved ones' lives just getting around the city. I think a lot more cyclists would use the street with a dedicated bike lane and space for multimodal transit users. Buses move so slowly through the space. The 42 and 43 buses are so slow and unreliable that I often take the 16th Street buses instead, even though they're not as direct for my trip. I was nearly hit by a car that decided to change lanes to get around the left-turning car at Columbia and 16th. This project is focused on solving a number of problems on Columbia Road that were determined during the needs assessment. You will hear these three problems and the goal of solving them throughout this presentation. The first problem we will be trying to solve is that there are unsafe conditions for vulnerable roadway users on Columbia Road. Vulnerable user is a term that primarily refers to people walking and biking. They don't always make up the majority of the people on the street, but they are more susceptible to injury and crashes. In the case of Columbia Road, approximately 25% of crashes involved people walking and biking, but 2/3 of the injuries were people walking or biking. One aspect of this problem that you can see in the image on the right is that the bike lanes on the corridor stop and start intermittently. According to system-wide performance analysis performed for the bus priority plan, Columbia Road had some of the slowest bus speeds in the district. In the image on the right is one of the worst locations for bus delays on the approach to 16th Street. It often takes buses 4 or 5 minutes just to go from 17th Street to 16th Street. This project will aim to develop solutions to reduce their travel time. Lastly, one of the great things about Columbia Road is the mix of ground floor retailers. However, it also presents a problem because the demand for commercial loading and pickup and drop-off, also known as PUDO, exceeds the amount of space available to them. Now I will go through some of the concepts proposed to solve these problems and describe the process to arrive at these concepts. Columbia Road is only 50 feet wide, and there is simply not room to fit all of the possible roadway functions into the street. As you can see in the image, if we wanted to put in a bus lane, a median, travel lanes in both directions, and also parking on both sides of the street and protected bike lanes, we would end up with a street that's 82 feet wide. As part of the strategy for this project, we need to set priorities and see where we can get the most value from all these different roadway functions on different parts of the street. We are focused on the three key requirements to solve those three problems that I described before. We want to enhance safety, especially for vulnerable roadway users that are more likely to be injured or killed when they're in crashes. We are also aiming to reduce the bus travel time and better accommodate commercial loading and access. When thinking about how to develop this concept, we divided the roadway into 4 sections, which each have unique attributes. The northern end from 17th Street to 18th Street has lighter loading demand, but it has heavy northeastbound congestion, as I previously mentioned. Between 17th Street and 18th Street, there is extremely high loading demand, in particular on the block between Champlain and Ontario. There's moderate loading demand on the other side of 18th Street to Belmont, where a number of restaurants and smaller grocery stores are located. There's also about a 20% reduction in traffic volume on the south side of 18th Street. Then finally, on the approach to Connecticut Avenue, it's more residential and there's lighter loading demand, but there's a moderate southwestbound congestion, particularly on the approach to Connecticut Avenue. As part of our concept development process, DDOT evaluated 6 concepts and identified a preferred concept based on technical consideration. This is a preferred concept that was developed based on technical considerations and community feedback we received during the needs assessment. However, prior to determining the direction of the project, we need to receive community feedback on how these concepts will meet the community's needs. And again, the primary technical criteria we used to evaluate these concepts was in regard to how they address the issues on the corridor, improving bicycle accommodations, reduced travel time for buses, and accommodation of commercial loading and access. First, I will tell you about the concept that DDOT prefers. This preferred concept would be a PBL through the whole corridor, except for on the downhill southwest approach to Connecticut Avenue. It would provide a 24/7 southwestbound shared bus and bike lane from Kalorama to Connecticut Avenue. It would also provide a 24/7 northeastbound bus and left turn lane onto Little Harvard, starting at 17th Street. With this configuration, we would still be able to provide parking and loading zones on one side of the street through most of the corridor. Another concept we looked at was a 2-way protected bike lane. This is an attractive option because it provides a protected bike facility with the smallest footprint, so you can still fit a parking lane and potentially also a second parking lane or a bus lane on some of those key segments that are the most congested. However, there are several issues with this approach. The width of Columbia Road would require substandard lane widths for many of the roadway functions. For example, we try to provide 2-way bike lanes that are greater than 8 feet wide where possible. Another problem is that it does not allow a seamless connection with the future bike lane on Connecticut Avenue, which will be one-way PBLs on each side of the street heading up to Columbia Road. The other problem is that it would require a 2-way bicycle movement through a shared bus boarding platform. So that means people would be getting off and on the bus onto a platform that people are also riding their bikes across in 2 directions. That's something we can do in areas with lower bus and bicycle ridership, but it's less appropriate on this corridor. The other thing about building 2-way protected bike lane is that we try not to have any left turns across the bike lane outside of a protected signal phase, where there is a green arrow indicating that drivers can cross and make a left turn, and a red light indicating that bicyclists and drivers should not cross the street at that time. That results in additional signal phases that increase delay for bicyclists, pedestrians, buses, and general purpose vehicles. A related consideration is that left turn restrictions would need to be put in place at many locations, which could cause potential circulation challenges for local traffic. The third concept that we looked at was to only add protected bike lanes. Protected bike lanes provide the highest level of comfort for an on-street bike facility. They also provide the advantage of wider travel lanes that would reduce stress for bus operators. The negative is that it does not reduce travel time for buses compared to some of the other options that we provided. And you will note that this is very similar to the DDOT-Preferred Concept, and the impacts to parking, which we will review shortly, are also similar. In most of the concepts that we review, additional roadway functions are added by removing parking. This option goes a step further and evaluates removing a travel lane on Columbia Road for a segment in order to provide a bus lane. As we already know, Columbia Road is one-way westbound east of 16th Street. This concept would extend that condition all the way to Euclid, such that cars can travel southwest but not northeast. Instead, beginning at Euclid Street, the northbound general purpose lane would become a bus lane. It's important to note that this concept is compatible with many of the other concepts that we will be sharing on the south side of Euclid. This concept would allow for parking on one side of the street between 17th and 16th, while the preferred alternative would remove parking from both sides of the street between 17th and 16th, and would allow reduced travel time for buses through the most congested part of the corridor. However, based on analysis of turning movement counts, trip routing to nearby origins and destinations, and trip records from ride-hailing apps, Columbia Road serves mostly local traffic. This means that if a closure occurred, northeast-bound trips would not all be dispersed to alternative east-west corridors. And there is therefore a strong concern that many cars will still need to access Columbia Road, and so they will just do it from the other direction. So we would be trading northeast-bound congestion for southwest-bound congestion. And as it concerns bus operations, buses would have reduced travel time heading northeast, but increased travel time in the southwest direction. This is in addition to the numerous traffic circulation and enforcement challenges that would be difficult to address. One other concept evaluated for Columbia Road was shared bus-bike lanes similar to what you see on 14th Street in Columbia Heights between Euclid Street and Irving Street. This concept would be applicable between 18th Street and Connecticut Avenue. It would also be compatible with other options on the north side of 18th Street. In this application, bus lanes would be made extra wide at bus stops so that bikes can navigate around buses, and would potentially include protection to ensure that cars are not able to drift into the bus lane. The positive is that this provides a higher level of bicycle comfort, especially for a mix of different size and speed micromobility vehicles. There is a growing number of types of micromobility vehicles on our roadways that are electric or unpowered in all different sizes, and the growth in the volume and diversity of those vehicles is only expected to continue. These wider shared bus and bike lanes make it possible for them to pass each other as comfortably as needed. It would also reduce travel time along the whole southern half of the corridor for buses. The negative is that no parking would be available between 18th Street and Connecticut Avenue. This is particularly challenging because it makes it susceptible to violations, especially in the commercial areas. Also, going downhill, people are pretty comfortable riding in a lane that's shared with buses, but particularly going uphill, it's not considered an all ages and abilities facility. Also, the need for space to accommodate right and left turning vehicles through this corridor may compromise some of the benefits of the shared lanes. The final concept is applicable south of 18th Street, and it's very similar to DDOT's preferred concept. The distinction is that it provides a protected bike lane for the whole segment of Columbia Road between 18th and Connecticut by providing a separate bus-only lane for the southbound approach to Connecticut Avenue instead of a shared bus and bike lane. The negative is that it would remove all of the parking from the block between 19th Street and Connecticut Avenue. This is a large block with limited alley and side street access and few alternatives for people to do pickup and drop off and parcel deliveries. Similar to the other concepts, the DDOT-Preferred Concept has trade-offs. The positive is that it addresses the most severe sources of delay for buses. It improves loading accommodations in the corridor, and it also provides a high-quality, low-stress bicycle facility. The downside is that it reduces the total number of parking spaces in the corridor, and it also only provides a bus lane on about 20% of the corridor. The image to the right provides a more clear view of how the DDOT preferred concept would work near 16th Street. All of the buses heading northeast on Columbia Road take a left onto what's known as Little Harvard Street right before they reach 16th Street. However, they presently get stuck in traffic that is going across 16th Street. This concept would mean extending the left turn lane all the way back to 17th Street just for buses to let them bypass the queue of cars waiting to cross 16th Street and go straight to their left turn. In present day, there is a bus stop at Mozart Place. In the proposed condition, that stop would be moved to 17th Street, and once the bus services that stop, it would move into a center turn lane for buses. The DDOT preferred concept would result in reduced parking availability. Just updating the roadway to DDOT standards would reduce the number of parking spaces on the corridor from about 200 to 180. This refers to the fact that DDOT has changed their standards to not allow parking within 25 feet of crosswalks or inside of intersections. Currently, the signage and pavement marking on Columbia Road allows parking in many such places. Implementation of the preferred concept would further reduce the amount of parking spaces from 180 to 100. That is because there is not room to provide a protected bike lane in addition to bidirectional traffic and parking on both sides of the street. Most of the remaining parking in the commercial areas would be converted to loading zones. The proposed time frame for these loading zones is from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. from Monday to Friday. Outside of that time frame, general purpose parking would be permitted. I would also like to note that pickup and drop off, also known as PUDO, is allowed in these loading zones. Here's a more detailed view of how parking regulations would change along Columbia Road with the number of parking spaces on each block and an estimate on how many spaces would remain with the DDOT preferred concept. As I mentioned, in the area near the commercial areas near 18th Street would become commercial loading. During the needs assessment, we worked to quantify what the total demand is for commercial loading on this corridor, which is to say, what is the length of all the vehicles that are providing delivery to those businesses at a given time. And in developing these curbside regulations, we made sure that the length of the curbside available for commercial vehicles matched what the demand is. And again, these loading zones are proposed to operate from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and outside of that time frame, it would be open to general parking needs. The parking that would remain in residential areas would keep the same regulations in place. Implementing protected bike lanes on a street with bus stops require that we reconfigure how those bus stops work in many cases, and there are two different configurations that we use. We call them bus stop islands and shared bus stops. With bus stop islands, there is a platform where passengers can wait for the bus, and bicyclists are able to pass between that island and the sidewalk. For a shared bus stop, passengers wait for the bus on the sidewalk, And then when a bus arrives, bicyclists yield and wait for bus passengers to cross the island and board or alight the bus. Bus islands are preferred where there is space, which is typically on the side of the street where there is parking. And shared bus stops offer an alternative in space-constrained settings. Another aspect of bus priority projects is to evaluate the amount of space between bus stops and see if there is an opportunity to rebalance that distance. The current average distance between bus stops on Columbia Road is 760 feet. For local bus service, it's preferred to have 4 or 5 stops per mile, which is the equivalent of 1,060 to 1,320 feet. 7 out of 10 bus stops on Columbia Road have shelters, which is a high percentage and will make it more difficult to relocate bus stops. Through a bus stop rebalancing effort along Columbia Road, it would be possible to increase the average stop spacing from 760 feet to 1,140 feet, which would result in reduced travel time for buses. Through bus stop rebalancing, there is also an opportunity to improve safety by moving stops closer to crosswalks with traffic signals and moving stops to the far side of intersections to improve visibility and reduce conflict with turning vehicles. Further design and community feedback is required before determining what the final bus stop locations will be on Columbia Road. Future further design and next steps. There are many details of this project that I have not gotten into at this point. At this point, we want to familiarize the community with the trade-offs associated with the different concepts so that we can determine what the high-level concept will be. Once we get into the design, we'll be able to determine a lot more details. Regarding bus stop locations, the final concept that is selected will dictate the design of the boarding platforms, which impacts the suitability for shelters in different locations. So before we can make a specific proposal in terms of bus stop location, we need to select a concept and then receive public feedback. There's an opportunity to make a lot of safety improvements on Columbia Road that I haven't been able to get into during this presentation, because where it's possible to do things like curb extensions, median refuges, improved crosswalks, etc., that will depend on the concept that's selected through this process. However, I want to make it clear that any one of these concepts will be focused on addressing safety issues in the corridor. Another important thing for us to get public feedback on is the parking regulations. We know where and when commercial loading needs to be accommodated, but outside of that time period and in those locations, we welcome public feedback on what will best serve the community needs. Also, during design, there will be more changes to traffic operations. There may be left turn restrictions, traffic signal modifications, and more. But again, that will depend on what the final concept is that is selected through this process. Then lastly, we want to make sure that this project is integrated into the overall street grid and it's connective and that it makes sense. We want to provide logical transitions from any bike facilities that we're constructing to nearby bike facilities, but the final concept will determine how it makes sense to make those connections. The next step for this project is to continue with the public outreach and keep the conversation going about these concepts. I would appreciate it if you could get onto our website and provide concepts before September if possible, so that this fall DDOT will be in a position to select a concept and inform the community of that decision. And then through spring 2023, we will be working on the preliminary design, and then we aim to have a completed design by fall 2023 so that we are ready for construction in 2024. There is a new project website for the whole bus priority program and also for the Columbia Road project. The URLs are on this slide here, and on the new website there is a new survey. Many of you may have already filled out the survey, but there is a new one that is specifically focused on getting feedback on these concepts. Some examples of the questions are, what do you think of the different concepts? Is there one that you support? Do you have feedback on the proposed bus stop locations? And does 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. make sense for the loading zones in those dense commercial areas? And then finally, what else do we need to know? We already have feedback you may have submitted in the previous survey, so don't feel like there's a need to repeat yourself. But if there is something you would like to share, then we would like to hear it. You can email me directly at kevin.harrison@dc.gov. You can also call the bus priority team and either leave a voicemail or let us know that you would like for us to call you back. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I look forward to hearing from you.